The strangest thing about that night wasn't that my coworker twisted her ankle. It wasn't even that I carried her through the rain, drove her home, or stayed until I knew she was safe. It was the way her father looked at me when he opened the front door. He stared at me for 3 long seconds, then reached out his hand. "So you're him." Finally. I had never met the man before. I had no idea what he meant. And judging by the way my coworker suddenly looked away, neither did I want to know. My name is Daniel, and until that evening, I had always believed that doing the right thing was simple. You helped someone because they needed help. You showed kindness because you could. You didn't expect anything in return. But sometimes, one small act of kindness opens a door you never knew existed, and behind that door is a story that changes everything. If you believe in kindness, second chances, and the idea that one good decision can change someone's life, please take a moment to like this story, share it with someone who needs hope, and subscribe to the channel for more heart-touching stories. It had been raining since late afternoon, the kind of heavy summer rain that turned the streets into mirrors and made every traffic light look twice as bright. Most people in our office had already left, but I was still sitting at my desk trying to finish a report my manager needed first thing the next morning. Across the office, Emily was packing her laptop into her bag. She was one of those co-workers everyone seemed to like without really knowing why. She was polite without being fake, funny without trying too hard, and always the first person to help someone who was struggling. We weren't close friends. We had coffee together sometimes. We exchanged jokes in the hallway. We had worked on a few projects together. But there was something about her I had noticed over the previous few months. She seemed tired. Not physically tired. The kind of tired that lives behind someone's eyes. That evening, when she stood up, she took one step toward the elevator and suddenly stumbled. I heard the sharp sound of her gasp before I even saw what happened. Her ankle had twisted badly. I rushed over and found her sitting on the floor, one hand gripping the edge of a desk and the other wrapped around her ankle. She tried to laugh it off, insisting she was fine, but when she attempted to stand, her face went pale. The elevator doors opened behind us. Then closed again. The building was almost empty. I crouched beside her and told her I would take her home. She immediately refused. She said her father would come. I asked if he was nearby. She hesitated. Then she admitted he was recovering from a heart problem and had been sleeping badly for weeks. She didn't want to worry him. That was when I understood why she had been so exhausted lately. I told her I wasn't asking for permission. I was simply making sure she got home safely. She looked at me for a moment, then quietly nodded. Getting her downstairs was harder than I expected. She couldn't put any weight on the ankle, so I helped her lean against me. Outside, the rain had become even heavier. By the time we reached my car, both of us were soaked. Emily kept apologizing. I kept telling her to stop. On the drive, she finally relaxed enough to talk. She told me about her father, Robert, a widower who had raised her alone after her mother died when Emily was 17. She told me how he'd worked 2 jobs for years so she could attend college. She told me how he'd never remarried because, according to Emily, he was too stubborn to admit he was lonely. Then she became quiet. After a few minutes, she said something that surprised me. She said her father had been asking about me. I laughed because I thought she was joking. She wasn't. Apparently, I'd come up in conversations more than once. Whenever I helped her with work. Whenever I stayed late to finish something she was struggling with. Whenever I brought her coffee after noticing she'd forgotten breakfast. I suddenly felt embarrassed. Those things hadn't meant anything to me. They were just small acts of kindness. But to someone else, they had apparently meant much more. When we reached her neighborhood, Emily asked me to stop a few houses away. I asked why. She said she didn't want her father seeing her arrive with a man at night. I laughed again, but she didn't. She looked genuinely nervous. Eventually, we parked outside her house. I helped her out, walked her to the front door, and waited until she found her keys. She opened the door. Before she could say anything, the porch light came on. A man appeared in the doorway. He was probably in his late 60s, with silver hair, tired eyes, and a posture that suggested he'd spent his entire life refusing to admit when he was in pain. He looked at Emily's ankle. Then at me. Then back at Emily. And something changed in his expression. He stepped forward. He reached out his hand. "So you're him." Finally. I froze. Emily closed her eyes. "Dad," she whispered, not wanting to meet my gaze. Robert shook my hand firmly. His grip was surprisingly strong. Then he thanked me. But the strange thing was that he didn't sound like a father meeting his daughter's coworker. He sounded like a man meeting someone he'd been expecting for a long time. Inside the house, Robert insisted I come in for coffee. Emily protested, embarrassed. But her father wouldn't take no for an answer. The living room was warm and modest. Family photographs covered the walls. There were pictures of Emily as a little girl, Emily at graduation, Emily beside her mother, and Emily standing next to her father at what looked like every important moment of her life. Then I saw one photograph that made me stop. It was a picture of Robert sitting in a hospital bed. And beside him was Emily. Robert noticed me looking. He told me that was the night he almost died. Emily had been at work when it happened. She hadn't known. But someone had stayed with him. A stranger. A man who had found him struggling outside a grocery store, called an ambulance, waited with him at the hospital, and then disappeared before Robert could even learn his name. Robert said that man had saved his life. Then he looked at me. He said he had spent months trying to find him. My heart started pounding. I asked what that had to do with me. Robert smiled sadly. He said the stranger had left behind one thing. A name. Daniel. My stomach dropped. There were millions of Daniels in the world. I told him it couldn't be me. But then he described the jacket the stranger had been wearing. A dark blue jacket. The same jacket I'd owned for years. He described a small scar on the stranger's left hand. I looked down at mine. There it was. I suddenly remembered that night. I'd been driving home from work nearly 2 years earlier when I saw an older man collapse near a grocery store. I had called for help, stayed beside him, and ridden in the ambulance because no one else was there. At the hospital, a nurse told me his daughter was on the way. I left because I thought my presence was no longer necessary. I had completely forgotten about it. But Robert hadn't. He had remembered every detail. He told me he'd asked Emily about the man who had saved him. She eventually told him about me. Not because she knew I was the same person. She didn't. She had only mentioned me because she had noticed how often I helped people. Robert had started connecting the pieces. And apparently, he had been waiting for the right moment to meet me. I looked at Emily. She was crying quietly. She told me she'd never told me about her father's search because she didn't want me to feel obligated to their family. She said she had watched me help people for months and wondered how someone could be so generous without expecting anything. Then she admitted something that broke my heart. She said kindness had become rare in her life. After her mother died, her father became obsessed with protecting her. He worked himself sick. She became obsessed with protecting him. Eventually, both of them forgot how to simply live. She said I'd been one of the first people in years who made her feel like she didn't have to carry everything alone. I didn't know what to say. I had spent most of my life believing my small acts didn't matter. I held doors. I gave rides. I stayed late. I helped strangers. I thought kindness was something you did and forgot. That night, I realized people don't always forget. Sometimes they carry those moments for years. Robert eventually looked at me and told me something I'll never forget. He said that when his wife died, he stopped believing the world was kind. When he nearly died himself, a stranger proved him wrong. And when his daughter began losing hope, another person quietly reminded her that good people still existed. He squeezed my hand. He told me I hadn't just saved him that night 2 years ago. I had given him a reason to believe his daughter would be okay. The next morning, Emily's ankle was swollen badly, but the doctor said there was no fracture. She would recover. Robert, however, was struggling. His health had deteriorated more than he'd admitted. Emily had been taking time off work to care for him, but she was close to losing her job. She was terrified. I couldn't fix everything. But I could help with one thing. I spoke to our manager and explained the situation without sharing anything Emily hadn't given permission to share. The company adjusted her schedule. A few coworkers organized a small support fund. Someone arranged meal deliveries. Another colleague offered to drive Emily to appointments. What began with one twisted ankle somehow became a circle of people helping one family. And Robert noticed. A few weeks later, I visited their house again. This time, Emily opened the door. She was walking normally. She smiled. Behind her, Robert sat in his favorite chair. He looked healthier. And on the coffee table was a photograph. It was the three of us. Robert looked at the picture and said he had spent years searching for the man who saved his life. Then he realized he didn't need to search anymore. Because sometimes, the people who change our lives aren't meant to appear once. Sometimes they're meant to stay. Emily and I eventually became more than coworkers. Not immediately. There was no dramatic confession. No perfect movie moment. There were simply more dinners. More conversations. More laughter. More ordinary days. And somehow, ordinary days became the most beautiful part. Robert became the father figure I never realized I needed. He would call me on weekends just to ask whether I was eating properly. He'd pretend he needed help fixing something around the house when he really wanted company. And every time I left, he'd stand at the door and tell me to drive carefully. One evening, months later, I asked him why he'd said those words that first night. "So you're him." Finally. He smiled. He said he'd known from the moment he saw me. Not because of the jacket. Not because of the scar. Because kindness had a recognizable face. And he'd seen that face before. I still think about that night whenever I drive through heavy rain. I think about how close I came to saying, "Someone else will help her." I think about how easy it would have been to keep working. To let her call a ride. To walk away. But I didn't. And that tiny decision changed 3 lives. Mine. Emily's. And Robert's. We often imagine that changing someone's life requires something extraordinary. Money. Power. A heroic sacrifice. But sometimes it is just a ride home. A hand held in the rain. A door opened for someone who is struggling. A few minutes spent beside a stranger who is scared. We don't always get to see what those moments become. We don't know who remembers them. We don't know how long someone carries our kindness after we've forgotten giving it. So if this story touched your heart, please like the video, share it with someone who believes kindness still matters, and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps these stories reach people who may need a little hope today. And before the story ends, I want to ask you something special. Comment, "Kindness always comes back," if you believe that even the smallest good deed can change a life. Because somewhere tonight, someone may be sitting alone, believing nobody cares. And maybe the only thing they need is one person to prove them wrong. I drove my coworker home because she couldn't walk. I thought I was simply helping someone through a difficult evening. I never expected her father to shake my hand and say, "So you're him." Finally. But now I understand. We don't always know when we're becoming part of someone's story. Sometimes we are the stranger who stays. Sometimes we are the friend who shows up. Sometimes we are the person someone remembers years later because, for a few minutes, we made the world feel a little less lonely. And maybe that's what kindness really is. Not changing the whole world. Just changing someone's world for a moment. And trusting that moment will travel farther than we ever could.